Hello everyone. Today we will be continuing with the theme of dystopias and utopias. I thought last week was actually particularly interesting, looking at 1984 and Orwell, as well as those posters by Banksy um, and the panopticon as well. This idea of kind of ideology having a presence and kind of directing our movements or making us prisoners. Today, we will be looking again, at Utopia Dystopia, and we will start with a particularly, I think, good video, which gives many more references to Utopia and Dystopia, and a bit of history about this term. I spoke a bit about it last week, this idea of the Thomas More's book called Utopia, meaning no place, topios meaning, or topos meaning place. So to start with, we're going to be looking at this video, which is about 6 minutes long, and maybe slightly differently, this will be quite long this time, moving through sort of 1 part, 2 part, 3 part, 4 parts, 4 parts, which are filled in using this video. So they go from kind of questions like what type of world is mentioned, through to utopia is a world without, and kind of filling in things about types of examples of dystopic work. All the way through to this written comprehension here. I'm going to go through the video. We'll put the video on to begin with, and then I will help you a bit more with orientation around this, with the kind of sheet that I have here to try and help you go through it. Begin, however, with playing the video. Okay, so I'm going to put this on now, and I hope that it's loud enough. Of course, you can play and pause whenever you like to help you fill in these parts. Okay, I'll put it on now.
Have you ever tried to picture an ideal world, one without war, poverty, or crime? If so, you're not alone. Plato imagined an enlightened republic ruled by philosopher kings. Many religions promise bliss in the afterlife. And throughout history, various groups have tried to build paradise on Earth. Thomas More's 1516 book, Utopia, gave this concept a name, Greek for no place. Though the name suggested impossibility, modern scientific and political progress raised hopes of these dreams finally becoming reality. But time and time again, they instead turned into nightmares of war, famine, and oppression. And as artists began to question utopian thinking, the genre of dystopia, the not good place, was born. One of the earliest dystopian works is Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels. Throughout his journey, Gulliver encounters fictional societies, some of which at first seem impressive, but turn out to be seriously flawed. On the flying island of Laputa, scientists and social planners pursue extravagant and useless schemes while neglecting the practical needs of the people below. And the Huinum, who live in perfectly logical harmony, have no tolerance for the imperfections of actual human beings. With his novel, Swift established a blueprint for dystopia, imagining a world where certain trends in contemporary society are taken to extremes, exposing their underlying flaws. And the next few centuries would provide plenty of material. Industrial technology that promised to free laborers imprisoned them in slums and factories instead, while tycoons grew richer than kings. By the late 1800s, many feared where such conditions might lead. H.G. Wells' The Time Machine imagined upper classes and workers evolving into separate species, while Jack London's The Iron Heel portrayed a tyrannical oligarchy ruling over impoverished masses. The new century brought more exciting and terrifying changes. Medical advances made it possible to transcend biological limits, while mass media allowed instant communication between leaders and the public. In Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, citizens are genetically engineered and conditioned to perform their social roles. While propaganda and drugs keep the society happy, it's clear some crucial human element is lost. But the best-known dystopias were not imaginary at all. As Europe suffered unprecedented industrial warfare, new political movements took power. Some promised to erase all social distinctions, while others sought to unite people around a mythical heritage. The results were real-world dystopias, where life passed under the watchful eye of the state, and death came with ruthless efficiency to any who didn't belong. Many writers of the time didn't just observe these horrors, but lived through them. In his novel We, Soviet writer Yevgeny Zamyatin described a future where free will and individuality were eliminated. Banned in the USSR, the book inspired authors like George Orwell, who fought on the front lines against both fascism and communism. While his novel Animal Farm directly mocked the Soviet regime, the classic 1984 was a broader critique of totalitarianism, media, and language. And in the USA, Sinclair Lewis's It Can't Happen Here envisioned how easily democracy gave way to fascism. In the decades after World War II, writers wondered what new technologies like atomic energy, artificial intelligence, and space travel meant for humanity's future. Contrasting with popular visions of shining progress, dystopian science fiction expanded to films, comics, and games. Robots turned against their creators, while TV screens broadcast deadly mass entertainment. Workers toiled in space colonies above an Earth of depleted resources and overpopulated, crime-plagued cities. Yet politics was never far away. Works like Dr. Strangelove and Watchmen explored the real threat of nuclear war, while V for Vendetta and The Handmaid's Tale warned how easily our rights could disappear in a crisis. And today's dystopian fiction continues to reflect modern anxieties about inequality, climate change, government power, and global epidemics. So why bother with all this pessimism? Because at their heart, dystopias are cautionary tales, not about some particular government or technology, but the very idea that humanity can be molded into an ideal shape. Think back to the perfect world you imagined. Did you also imagine what it would take to achieve? How would you make people cooperate? And how would you make sure it lasted? Now take another look. Does that world still seem perfect?
Okay, so that's the video there. As you see, as I was going through the video, I was trying to highlight kind of where the answers to these questions can be found. For example, what type of world is mentioned, a kind of idea of an ideal world, just to kind of go through a couple of things: a world without war, poverty, crime. And it gives you, types of people. For example, Plato is one of them spoken about. It also talks to you about the meaning of utopia, which I've spoken about before. So it tells you there, as well as what these dreams could turn into. So the opposite of dreams. Then it says about how this notion of utopia began to make certain groups of people think about, reimagining those. And therefore that utopia gave rise to a different type of genre, kind of the opposite of that genre. And the opposite of that genre, we have particular, we have a very early, example of here, and so I would like you to fill in with the earliest example of that. So if Thomas More gave rise to the idea of utopia, who gave rise to its opposite? So here would be dystopia, because here we've got this dystopia. And if you could give a few characteristics of that work, the author and the title of that work. And then what was the objective of this work? So if we have an objective of artists or people, authors who are writing utopias, what is the objective of people who are writing dystopias, or the opposite of that. Then we kind of move into a kind of moving away from science, moving into kind of maybe politics, or the kind of utopic or dystopic realities of particular ideas. So how is it possible to produce a utopia via advancements of technology? What did that promise? What are the advancements in industrial technology? So in particular, the notion of modernity here in the 19th century, what did that offer? And then what maybe were the consequences of that? And then moving into the new century here, kind of the rise of modernity, the end of the 19th century and 20th century. What did that promise? And what technological advancements really gave way and inspired a lot of the kind of dystopic writing? Think about 1984, in particular Huxwell. Drugs being a very particular use, or the notion of advancements, medical advancements here. And what did that enable? With medical advancements, for example, and another thing here, what did it enable? What changes could occur because of these advancements? And therefore, what problems were raised about this? So moving here then, okay, I suppose into a kind of a more general idea of the way that utopias and dystopias are affected by technological changes. So kind of what gives rise also to science fiction, so technological advances giving rise to science fiction, a type of writing that is concerned with technology and science. Here we're looking at kind of particular examples of those, maybe more ideological examples of those in the 20th century. And here, to give an example, here it doesn't speak about it, we have the idea of fascism or national or kind of Nazism, as well as what I would call Stalinism more than communism, Stalinism. Stalinism as a kind of means of authoritarian, kind of as a means of altering the economics of communism. And so that these kind of the rise of these strong ideologies, we can include capitalism as well within that. So capitalism, so Stalinism, or kind of a form of communism, authoritarian communism, as well as National Socialism or Nazism. So capitalism, Stalinism and Nazism, they influenced also a kind of new type of writing that was a reaction to the rise of those authoritarianism. And here we see the video giving particular examples here of those. And so I'd like you to fill in the example of those writers. One obviously we've heard of before being George Orwell, but another book here being spoken about as well. And then in the last part, I'd like us to think about how the notion of utopia and dystopia has evolved. So we have a new set of writers also writing, and it talks about some examples that many of you may know. The one I think that I've spoken about before, and I remember people being aware of this, was The Handmaid's Tale. And this is, we could also maybe talk about, it's kind of a religious dystopia actually, but it's a reaction to particular crises. The crisis of this being the crisis of reproduction, or the impossibility of reproducing humans, and therefore the kind of religious dystopic response to that. And then I would like to finish with, why are these kind of dystopic fiction or science fiction important? Here you can maybe respond more freely. What do they tell us, or what do they manage to critique? What's the point of them, in a way? Do they warn us of certain things? Do they manage to critique certain things? Okay, so hopefully with me kind of reading through that, as well as kind of pointing out through the video where the answers can be found, you can respond to these three parts here with help of the video. I'm going to stop the video now and allow you to fill that in. Obviously, you can listen to the video more than once. I'd probably advise you to listen to it first, like I did, and then kind of listen to it again with looking at where I'm pointing to, and maybe a third time after I've kind of spoken through it. Okay, I'm going to leave you to do that now and pause the video before I move to this interesting article in the Financial Times about Orwell and Huxley. So Huxley was mentioned in this video, I think in a particular book, Brave New World here, which is kind of a slightly earlier version from 1984, but another very interesting book in the kind of genre of dystopia or utopias. Okay, I'm going to stop the video now, let you fill in, and then I will move to the written comprehension. Well, I hope that wasn't too difficult, the first part of the lesson today. For the second part, I'm going to read an article which was written by John Lancaster in the Financial Times in 2019. It's a particularly interesting article, and as you can see from the title, Orwell versus Huxley, it talks about the two writers mentioned in the video who write dystopian science fictions. Orwell, we've already looked at last week, 1984, and Huxley's Brave New World, which was written slightly earlier in 1932. Why this is interesting is it kind of asks us about our present, so the relationship that these pieces of fiction have to what we are living today. Okay, I'm going to read out this article, and then once it's read through, it's 3 pages long, there will, as usual, there'll be questions to answer about them, and until we get through to the grammar section at the end. So I will start by reading through the article. Okay. So, Orwell versus Huxley. Whose dystopia are we living in today? John Lancaster, The Financial Times, January 18, 2019. The modern world looks like many a dystopia, a version of the darkest timeline, to borrow a term from American sitcom Community. Whose dystopia, though? Which writer best imagined this moment of turmoil and dysfunction? The greatest contribution to the tradition of dystopian fiction are 2 defining masterpieces from the 20th century, both of them bestsellers at the time and ever since. Aldous Huxley's 1932, Brave New World, and George Orwell's 1949, 1984. The 2 dystopias have many details in common. Both writers saw a future shaped by weapons of mass destruction, biological and chemical weapons in Huxley's case, nuclear war in Orwell's. They agreed about the danger of permanent social stratification, with humanity divided into categories determined by biological engineering and psychological conditioning, Huxley, or traditional class combined with totalitarian loyalty systems, Orwell. Both men imagined future societies completely obsessed with sex, though in diametrically opposite ways. State-enforced repression and celibacy in the case of Orwell, deliberate narcotizing, promiscuity in the case of Huxley. Both men thought the future would be dominated by America. Both men thought that future governments would spend a lot of effort permanently trying to incite economic consumption. Not that either man thought of anything as wildly fantastical as quantitative easing. To give you a break, quantitative easing was after the economic crash in 2008. The government decided to stimulate the economy by essentially putting more money into the banking system so that loans could start again. Both began their books with a short sentence designed to signal a world which was familiar but also disconcertingly futuristic. A squat grey building of only 34 stories begins Brave New World. We're supposed to gasp with amazement at the only. 1984 begins. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. 13, the horror. Both men were writing warnings. The message of the book, said Huxley, was, "This is possible. For heaven's sake, be careful about it." In his vision, humanity was facing a future world tranquilized by pleasure and drugs and the voluntary distractions of civilized infantilization. For Orwell, humanity was facing a permanent state of war and totalitarian mind control, summed up by the image of a boot stamping on a human face forever. all the overlap, though, they're usually seen as contradictory, conflicting versions of the future. The difference between the two dystopias is rooted in one of imaginative literature's central distinctions. Many writers of speculative fiction, a term preferred over science fiction by Margaret Atwood, among others, like to stress that their work is a vision of the present magnified and intensified. The future is here, William Gibson said. It's just unevenly distributed. Orwell did create some technological innovations for his future world, but in essence, his 1984 is a deep look into the heart of already existing totalitarian societies. Some of the details may be from the straightened world of the 1940s. The novel is pervaded by the smell of boiled cabbage, but the story goes far past that into the depths of the human heart and a totalitarian project to reshape it. It is because of that, in this difficult historic moment, that the Orwell versus Huxley contest might seem to have been concluded in Orwell's favour. Nothing, however, could rival the sales boost provided by Donald Trump. This president embodies the insight that given a willingness to lie about compunction, norms of veracity can be abolished with extraordinary speed. It is one of the central demands of the party, in Orwell's book, that you reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. Trump put that maxim into effect on his very first day in office, with his insistence that people ignore the evidence of their senses about his inauguration day crowds. Wait a minute, though. Orwell was right about many things, but Huxley was right too. Huxley's background was similar to Orwell's. Not only did they both go to Eton, which is a very famous private school in Britain, Huxley went back there as a young man and even taught Orwell French. Despite that, Huxley's milieu was very different, scientific and philosophical, rather than politically engaged. The emotional texture of Brave New World is very different from that of 1984. There is a playful, a lightness, not at all like the grim, repressed, grey-toned landscape of Orwell's novel. The question of eugenics offers us a clue to the reason for this. Huxley was interested in eugenics, which had a fascination for many intellectuals of the left as well as of the right. He came to see it as a sinister field, correctly, since the thought that the poor have genetic traits which could and should be bred out of them is indeed one of the darkest and most dangerous ideas of the 20th century. But he had first felt the lure of the idea that modernity can improve us, that science can cure some of the pain and difficulties of being human. The fact that Huxley had been tempted by those thoughts helped him depict his ideas with a lighter, more explanatory touch than Orwell. Huxley's dystopia was the other sort of speculative fiction from Orwell's. Not a deep burrowing into the present, but a projecting of existing trends into the future. He genuinely was trying to think about what the future would be if things carried on in the direction they were headed. He was well placed to see trend lines in many of the sciences and make good guesses about where we were going. As a result, he can make a strong claim that he, and not Orwell, who did a better job of predicting modern life in the developed world. The revolutionary change in attitudes to sex, for instance, is not something many people foresaw in 1932. Huxley did. The separation of sex and reproduction is complete in Brave New World. It is near complete in modern life. He guessed correctly about the development of new technologies in contraception, and guessed correctly about the consequences of those techniques too. In Brave New World, promiscuity is not just normal, it is actively encouraged. Total frankness in all aspects of sexuality, ditto. Sex is a distraction and a source of entertainment, almost a drug. Huxley would have looked at our world of dating apps and sexualized mass entertainment, and perhaps especially shows such as Love Island and Naked Attraction, and awarded his predictions a solid A+. Orwell saw a future in which the state discouraged sex. In this respect, he was completely wrong, and Huxley was completely right. Huxley was more broadly right about pleasure. Orwell wrote about a world which was essentially constrained, pinched, grey. That was one of the main respects in which he was challenging the spirit of the 1940s. Huxley looked ahead and saw a future in which life was very pleasant, lullingly, deadeningly, numbingly pleasant. Undemanding pleasures and unchallenging entertainments are central to the functioning of society. Sources of distraction play a vital role. The Feelies, the main source of mass entertainment, are all about escape from the self. When the individual feels, society reels, is the motto, and every effort is made to stop people from feeling strong emotion. The preferred method for this is a soma, a side effect-free drug which guarantees dissociated happiness. Here again, Huxley could look at the modern use of antidepressants, anti-anxiety, and sedative medication and conclude that he has nailed it. One particular area of Huxley's prescience concerned the importance of data. He saw the information revolution coming in the form of gigantic card indexes. True, but he got the gist. It is amazing to see how many features of Facebook in particular are anticipated by Brave New World. Facebook's mission statement, to give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together, sounds a lot like the New World's motto, community, identity, stability. The world in which we haven't any use for old things dovetails with Mark Zuckerberg's view that young people are just smarter. You can still change direction. There will be life after Trump and Putin. There may even be life after Naked Attraction and Facebook. This theme of an attack on privacy is central to Orwell's vision too. Thought crime is one of the most serious crimes in 1984. It is at this point that we can start to see this in Huxley's novels, not as competing visions of the future, but as complementary, overlapping warnings. Our world has sex on display everywhere, entertainment to take you out of your mind whenever you want, and drugs to make you stop feeling. It also has an increasing number of strong men leaders who rewrite history and ignore the truth, and growing emphasis on crimes by thought. A globally dominant society ruled by a party and a strong leader. Society which uses every possible method of surveillance and data collection to monitor and control its citizens. A society which is also enjoying a record rise in prosperity and abundance and using unprecedented new techniques in science and genetics. The society would look like a blend of Orwell's and Huxley's visions. Huxley and Orwell both wrote their book to try and prevent their dystopias from coming true. Their success at prophecy is also their failure, because the greater they are, the more their projects didn't do what they were supposed to do. Neither men would have thought that a reason to give us hope. Neither man would have thought that a reason to give up hope. Their warnings are still valid. We can still change direction. Last word to Huxley, and forward to his dystopia written 20 years later, that I remain no less sadly certain that in the past that sanity is a rather rare phenomenon. I'm convinced that it can be achieved. I'd like to see more of it. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a second and then I will move on to describing the questions. Hello, I'd now, hopefully you've managed to go through that a couple of times and read it. I'd like us to go quickly through the questions now that we have. So, the first set of questions, the author compares two famous authors and their literary works. So, hopefully it'll be easy which two authors are mentioned in the article, what are their book titles, and then what are common in both. B, what was the goal of both authors when writing their dystopias? So Huxley, there is a quote also from Huxley that should help with this within the article. Why is John Lancaster comparing the two authors in their fiction? Does he make another comparison? So what is the purpose of this article? Why is he doing this comparison? Why does it matter to him for the present? 3A. Identify dystopian elements existing in real life, according to the author. So which of the elements, you can either find them for yourself, or which elements does the author discuss which may have, in a way, come true from what Huxley and Orwell are talking about? B. Associate these elements with characteristics from the two novels. So very similar here. The two novels, so the two novels written in here by the two authors, and then try and find which common points do they have with real life. So kind of a similar exercise here. B, I'd like you to reformulate this paragraph. So Huxley and Orwell both wrote their books to try and prevent their dystopias from coming true. Their success at prophecy is also their failure. Why is it their failure? Because the righter they are, the more their projects didn't do what they were supposed to do. Neither man would have thought that a reason to give up hope. Their warnings are still valid. We can still change direction. Last word to Huxley in the foreword to Dystopia, written 20 years later, though I remain no less sadly certain that in the past, that sanity is a rather rare phenomenon, I'm convinced that it can be achieved and would like to see more of it. So, is this hopeful or is it not hopeful? Or try and summarize what is going on in here. I'm going to move on to, I'm going to do this quickly here because this is not so much. So, moving on to the grammar section, I'd like you to observer les phrases suivantes. So, these ones here. Et que remarquez-vous de ces phrases? Qu'est-ce qu'il y a dans ces phrases qui est commun, qui est similaire ou différent? B. Précise. Complétez les phrases avec la particule qui convient parmi celles qui suivent. Away, back, down, in, off, out, up. So, for example, you must fill in the questionnaire and send it back. Sorry, I take back what I said. That was stupid. So those two there. Help you in. Back. And then this written expression here, which I think is quite interesting. So Huxley and Orwell both wrote their books to try and prevent their dystopias from coming true. Their success at prophecy is also their failure. Because the righter they are, the more their projects didn't do what they were supposed to. Neither man would have thought that a reason to give up hope. Their warnings are still valid. We can still change direction. Would you agree with the author? Do you think that despite troubling similarities with fictional dystopias, our world can still change direction? So, would you agree with the author? Do you agree with what the author is saying there? Do you think that despite troubling similarities with fictional dystopias, so despite the fact that our societies are becoming more dystopic, can our world still change direction? Or maybe, do you agree or disagree? Est-ce que vous êtes d'accord ou pas avec ce qui est dystopique ou pas dans l'article? Alors, quand on parlait de la contraception, de la pilule, est-ce que c'est mauvaise chose ou pas? Est-ce que c'est dystopique ou utopique? Voilà, comme ça. Et voilà. Ok, je vais arrêter maintenant et je vais mettre ça en ligne sur YouTube pour vous. Merci beaucoup. Au revoir.